Go ahead and
Today we're
start us,
going to
Mark.
talk
Sorry.
about templates and automation for collaboration, some options that we see repeatedly in the client work we do, and what tools we use. Here's the team. We all come at things from slightly different perspectives based on our backgrounds, so those labels tend to apply somewhat consistently or inconsistently depending on what we're talking about. So Emily, why don't you talk about these surveys, because I think you know.
I do. So we put the question out to the community this week as we are preparing for this session to just get a little pulse on who is using templates. So we see that majority of people are using it a little bit or maybe interested and not using it just yet. So for the people who are using site templates, we see that it's almost a 50-50 split between a third-party template tool and PnP site provisioning. We have a couple people doing site designs. So if anyone in this meeting now happens to be someone who completed this poll or is currently using a third-party template tool, I would love to hear what everybody's using. I know here at Simpraxis, we're big fans of Orchestry, so curious if that is what people are also using. Also, feel free to come off mute or share in the chat where you are on your template journey.
Exploring.
So by exploring, are you evaluating the technology of what to use, or are you already kind of started down a specific path and doing some beta testing?
We're mostly doing out of the box, but starting our modern journey this year. So we'll be figuring out what's going to be a right fit for us as we go.
Great.
I think I got it now. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, you wrenched it away from me. So
Thanks for vamping. Thanks for vamping for me, Mark.
Way to be 4 minutes behind, Mike.
Yeah. Is there anybody else who's currently doing this, like using automation to get to use to template sites and get consistent things? And how are you doing it?
Well, Ruth put in the chat that she uses list templates in the past. That's probably an on-prem thing. The venerable STP files.
No, Microsoft lists have templates now, Todd.
Oh, good Lord, I've fallen behind. I feel like Mike.
Have.
Wow. And I was just saying something nice about him. Damn it, Todd.
Yeah, God forbid that lingers too long.
Let's not get started down that road.
Yeah. Take up all our time.
Yep. List templates. Yep, that's good. That's good.
Move along, Mike.
Yeah. Yep. There we go. So here's some ways that we've found templates and automation improve collaboration. There's a few things that, like, why create templates? Like, what's the benefit of it? So some of this is the how on this slide, but the next few slides, and I'd like to come back to this slide, I'd like to speak first a little bit about the why. And Emily, I know you put together some content for us here.
Yeah, absolutely. So templating can support a lot of different things. Coming from that user experience and information architect perspective, I really love how it can support your governance plan. So you can create a consistent look and feel and hierarchy of information across all of your sites and use that template, let's say, to start maybe a communication site in your intranet.
Yeah, Emily, it really enables self-service provisioning of sites, but you can give people guardrails for that self-service, right, via templates?
Absolutely. And I'm a huge believer in self-service, that better empowering our different subject matter expert and content owners to be able to use all of these different sites and solutions independently with that guidance, I think really helps free up the IT teams to be focusing on all of these releases that are coming out, your strategic plan, and other areas. As I mentioned, it also helps support leveraging your visual hierarchy consistently. So this idea that each site I go to, I will have a consistent look and feel and location of information. That means all the site visitors don't need to relearn how to find information across the intranet. A really good example is putting the site owners at the bottom of every communication site homepage. So if there are issues or you have questions, you're looking for content, you know where to find that person that owns this site. And then I'll pitch this one over to Derek, because I know we made this slide together. Let's talk a little bit about brand identity and templating.
So you can also use templating to, enforce different site designs or to make sure that you have the right theme applied. And I think that, similar to visual hierarchy, where things are in the same place, making sure that things are the same color and ensuring that they all sort of fit in with that hierarchy makes sense. And it helps your users not have to decode the pages every time they go to it. And it doesn't mean that you have to be 100% on brand for every single site and they all need to be the same, but you could have a color palette that you specifically use for projects. You could have a color palette that you use specifically for, say, like ad hoc collaboration or like team communication. So you can leverage templates to start applying those things and make sure that they're enforced across your enterprise.
Can be a really great visual indicator of status too. We did some work where we were as things joined a hub site based on the status of the project, it got a different visual indicator about what that status was. So a quick view, and you're like, oh, I know this one is this, as you start learning those colors.
I also had mentioned reducing IT burden. So this idea that if we have a consistent look and feel across projects, that we can have that built out. So instead of IT clicking maybe the same manual repetitive buttons each time to get that, we can automate that a little bit better and shorten those steps to getting the site to, let's say, a standard project template. So they don't have to do all those steps out of the box. Now, something about templating, right? We talk a lot in the modern world about having this decentralized structure. So we have a separate site collection for each discrete topic, whether that be a department in your intranet or maybe a project. So when we have all of these, let's say, separate projects, and they all have that same structure, we still have the ability to pull together content across all of those separate project sites in that decentralized structure. So let's say we want to see all of the statements of work across our different clients, and we have a template for our client sites, and we have a content type for statement of work. We still have that ability to pull up content from across them all and see them in one spot.
So there, we understand the benefits here, and there's kind of a long continuum from just getting started and doing things in a relatively ad hoc way to doing things in a highly systematic way. And it kind of lends itself to a maturity model conversation. It's pretty funny, Mark. I know that this is your area, and we were talking about putting the lights on the Christmas tree, and I think you're at level 1. In terms of I go over every night and I plug in the lights and I unplug the lights, whereas like level 5, the Christmas tree would install itself. The lights would automatically go on. They would self-heal.
Todd's a level 5. Todd's totally a level 5.
I would give myself a solid 3, but I.
Well, I think the important part about the maturity model, though, is you get to decide at which level you feel you should be, right? So there's not a right or a wrong depending on your decision making.
Exactly, because it gives my son great joy to turn the Christmas tree on. So
exactly,
we want to be at that level.
Right. So what about? So this slide is actually from presentations we give about the Microsoft. The maturity model for Microsoft 365. There's a link in the back end of the slides to that if you haven't heard about it. The idea is that at different organizations go through different levels of capability around any given topic. So we thought we'd put a slide up to show how we think about that with respect to templating. Some of you, I think, said right up front, we create sites for people. And that's really the level 100. You do it manually. Maybe you set up a standard list manually. Maybe you add a couple columns to that list manually. It's totally fine if it works. If you're creating
Mark,
ones.
If I do 5 projects a year, this is probably perfect. Right?
Exactly. So volume can be an indicator that you need to do some automation. Consistency, changing workforce. All kinds of different reasons why you might think that you wanted to go up to level 200, which would be thinking about using some site designs, which might just create some standard lists with some standard columns, or PNP provisioning templates, which can actually set up the reason that we tend to go to PNP provisioning templates a lot of the time over site designs is you can set up the web parts on the home page among other pages, but you might just be applying those things manually. So maybe and it's not just about number of sites, but maybe you create 10 a year, so you run some PowerShell, each of the 10 times just to keep Todd happy, and you apply that PNP provisioning template to a site that you've just created by hand. Level 300, you might think about, automating that templating. You've got some maybe an Azure function that applies the site design or the PNP provisioning template based on some action that people take. Maybe they make a request, and then that request goes into a list, and when something lands in that list and has a certain status, boom, the site is created in an automated way. Level 400, you might start thinking about, well, let's start running some analytics. Let's make sure that we're managing the basket of sites that we've created this way. This site's been there a really long time. Maybe we better check and see if it's still in use, and if it's not in use, do whatever we decide we need to do about it. And really, in level 500, the Christmas tree is setting itself up. You've got lifecycle management. You have the ability to, in an automated way, crank up a site. Maybe automated steps along the way, that when maybe a project gets to its midpoint, you add some new lists to the site, because it becomes it ends up in a different state, and then when the project is done and recorded as done, something happens with that. It could be anything from removing it from a association with a hub site, to archiving it somehow, to all kinds of other things. So hopefully that sort of maturity model way of reflecting on where you'd like to be is also helpful. Again, you don't have to all want to be at level 500 at the top, because there are perfectly good reasons to be at any one of the other levels. Just you want to make sure you understand where you are and why that is.
Mike, you're on mute.
Man, I'm having a day. All right. The jump from 200 to 300, we talk about automation, and I think this is something we've argued about internally a fair amount. Is the jump from 200 to 300 also, I have a user interface for users to enable that automation, as opposed to somebody goes in and runs a PNP script to spin up a site?
Yeah,
I think
it's also very important who the players are, right? So if it's a one person shop, and that person knows PowerShell really well and knows how to write JSON and XML and all that stuff, and therefore they want to run apply the templates manually because they can be very consistent about that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. If the one person is not somebody who can do all of that stuff, it's much better to set something up that just takes care of things for you. So,
got it.
I think skills, the skill dimension always comes into this, and the ability to be repeatable.
Yep.
To that point, we have that overview slide on the different template options. That sometimes that far right column is what we're referring to, right? Which of these options requires that someone's a little bit more comfortable with code? Sometimes that far right column is a little bit more important when we're working with an organization of, let's say, 6 people. They don't have an IT department, and they don't necessarily have an IT background. That might push us towards looking at a third-party template tool, something like Orchestry potentially.
Great segue, Emily.
Yeah, there's a sort of a line missing here too, which is homegrown, right?
Yeah.
Like absolutely, Orchestry can give you that user interface that's for someone who doesn't know how to code, and that's an awesome solution, but maybe doesn't meet your needs, or for whatever reason that's not the tool you want to use. So you could theoretically have a completely homegrown solution that has user interface and all of those kinds of things to pick the template and yada yada yada. I mean, we do that for some of our larger customers. So.
Yeah, I think when in some of the older versions of SharePoint, that was sort of almost how you ended up having to do it, because there weren't good engines to drive things.
Exactly.
So there may be some legacy stuff lying around as well.
So is this a good point before we start talking reference architecture and some of the ways we see this done consistently in the field? Is this a good place to kind of open the floor up a bit and ask folks if they have any questions about this variety of options that we have in front of us and when we recommend what?
Yeah, and go
ahead. Sorry.
Say I was super excited when we prepared for this on Monday. Contrary to how it might look, we do actually prepare for all of these. This slide, I didn't know this slide existed until 48 hours ago, and I don't want to say it changed my life, but this is a discussion that we have had with customers, much like the jump from 200 to 300. You know what we do with that. This is another one of those things, trying to figure out a customer's needs and which of the several great tools we have to choose from. This slide is awesome. So for the folks watching, even if you're not quite here yet, make a mental note of this slide or look for the deck, because at some point, if you're thinking about making templates, having this in front of you will really help you figure out which road to go down. I think Emily put this together and it's great. I love it.
Yeah, this is money shot number 1. And I think we'll toggle to money shot number 2, which is the reference architecture, and speak to that a little bit.
Could you just pause, go back for 1 second?
Sure, of course.
I always have to get this beef out there. Site designs are awesome, except that they're not. Okay. For some reason, site designs came out like 2, maybe 3 years ago. And they did a whole bunch of really cool stuff, but what they don't do, and that in that pages column is really, really important. If you need to set up pages in your site, you can't use site designs because they don't do it. And there are all kinds of excuses and reasons for that. But what that does is it ends up pushing you to PNP provisioning templates. So that's why a lot of us are just jumping to PNP provisioning templates instead, because there's no point in doing a site design and then having to create a second thing to automate. So I want that no to turn green into a green yes, but it still hasn't happened yet.
Yeah,
go ahead, Todd.
And to Mark's point, I haven't seen a lot of movement on site designs. Like they hit the ground and there was a bunch of big changes and they added a bunch of stuff, and it's been sort of crickets since then. So I don't know how optimistic I am about that no turning into a yes.
Did they ever actually put out the folders and the file stuff that they announced at the last in-person Ignite?
It's there. It's there, but
it's
not well documented. And I mean, that's the other part about site designs, is that not only is it not progressing as much as you'd like it, they're not communicating much at all. So a lot of us have sort of lost faith. That's sort of what Todd's alluding. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
And the use case that I see that applies a lot to, Mark, is if you want to embed your governance into a site design and have sections of a homepage that say step 1, do this, go here are some links, here are some resources, all the way through, and you can really govern things very nicely. Just not possible if you can't incorporate page content into a site design, right?
Right.
Okay. See that use case all the time. All right, so let's talk reference architecture a little bit about ways that we configure SharePoint to do this. Now, the example is for a real estate management or a property management firm, but where you see properties and buildings, you can think of projects, and it'll work exactly the same way in terms of hierarchies. Emily, do you want to step us through this? I think you have the most familiarity with this.
Sure. So we're just using one example, right, of that property management to pull out this idea that templates don't always have to do with your intranet, right? It might just be a subset of your intranet. So in this example, our intranet communication sites were built independently, manually, but this company, because they have this recurring need that's always the same, when it came to their team sites and collaboration, we realized we could make a template for this. So what often happens is we first want to create a space for any common documents, as well as an entry point to any of our templates. And we need something to kick off building and provisioning these different sites. So in this example, it's a property management company. They're focused on their different properties. So we made a property site for the consistent documents. Then we made a property list. And in that list is all of the metadata we want to gather across one property. As we put in and fill out certain fields, that automation then kicks off provisioning the exact same site template for each of these buildings. So all of the different building sites look exactly the same. The step further that we also took is we built a custom web part. So that information about each building that we're adding in the property list, we're just taking that subset of information and also presenting it on the building site itself. What that affords us is giving us the information that we need where we are when we need it. So we can make a choice of which property I need to work on from the properties hub as well as that list. But then when I'm in the property site itself, I see absolutely everything I need to about that one specific area. So we're reducing that information load.
I think it's important to just reiterate, you can replace that word properties with any sort of unit of work. We've worked with a couple of property management companies where this has been a structure, but it could be projects inside a consulting company, R&D
clients
projects.
and matters,
right?
Anything really.
Realty transactions.
So, Emily, there's no distinction visually on this IA slide about team sites versus communication sites. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, templates can be applied to both. I think that was just me making a quick slide. So there's no technical limitation of where we want to use templates, though I do find it's very common for an organization who's starting on their template journey to focus on the team sites first. Depending on the solution that you make, you might need to make some tweaks to have it apply to both. So for example, PNP provisioning templates, I know there's a line in the code where you need to call out whether it's a communication or team site. You don't need to do that for things like site designs. So do pay attention to what you're making the templates for, just in case your technology choice does have that impact.
And we can have
typically,
either,
I think,
Mark, yeah.
Typically, the intranet, we're building communication sites. The actual work of the organization, the properties tree in this case, we tend to be building team sites. So, I mean, that tends to be the pattern that we see.
Yep. But you can have both communication sites and team sites as kind of members of the same, joined to the same hub, right? There's no reason you couldn't interchange those if you wanted to. Usually they serve such different purposes that you wouldn't, but you could technically if you needed to. So what we've talked about is very SharePoint specific, and I'd like to go back to a prior slide and speak to a little bit about how do we extend this across more than just SharePoint, right? If we're working across Microsoft 365, there could be Yammer communities, there could be planner plans, there could be teams, capital T, that have to do with this. And I'd love to maybe speak to how we've seen some of that work. I think probably speaks to the last bullet here, the third-party tools piece. Would anyone like to touch on that?
I mean, I definitely can speak to having used Orchestry for that piece of it, where we had a client using it to provision team sites, provision the teams in Teams so that we would have a properly configured team with the properly configured tabs that we wanted to enable the users in that team to work together properly, especially for very non-technical users. Having that pre-set up really helps them go, oh, okay, here's all the things that I need right at my fingertips. It's already configured. I just need to go. As well as we were using Planner for those teams. So being able to provision the Planner plan already pre-configured with all the tasks that needed to be completed for that type of project, and then surface that Planner plan in the Teams tab already configured, in the SharePoint site already configured. We did some more stuff too, which is also that sort of third-party, more mature type of thing where we wanted to have some custom solutions that we had built surfaced. Again, an application customizer, which is a SharePoint framework extension that basically created a custom header on every SharePoint page that surfaced some information about the project that was stored in that more centralized project list, custom forms and things like that that we could get auto deployed into those teams. So having a more mature tool, we could do that pretty quickly. But again, I mentioned it earlier, we could have also done that, with ad hoc development if that was the more appropriate approach. But it is significantly more mature to do something like that, to your point, Mike.
Yeah, and I think what we get excited about with Orchestry in particular is as the work surface for collaboration changes from SharePoint to Teams in a lot of organizations, as Teams gets adopted more, using a tool like Orchestry to ensure that all the different components are spun up in a governed and well managed way, I think gets us. We see a lot of value in that for sure.
Yep, for sure.
One of the things that happens when you use site designs or site P&P provisioning templates is that everyone focuses on, well, let's create a new site and apply this thing. So now we have our right starting point. But your starting points change over time, right? So you may have a site design that has a couple of additions or subtractions or changes to it. So for both of those two methods, you need to think about, well, how do we manage the deltas, right? We need to create a third list, not a fourth list over time. So site designs are pretty good. They're idempotent, so you can apply the same site design to the same site and only the delta will happen. But that only works if you've thought things through well. So you have to think idempotently as well to make sure that you don't damage anything that's already there that might be in use. Same thing with P&P provisioning templates. So you have to get through some reasoning and some technical prowess to understand what effect applying a new version of things will actually make. Emily and I have actually gotten into a habit of creating what we call a P&P provisioning template mini, which applies the delta, because oftentimes it's a very small change on top of a very large template. And so we can just spin through the old sites and apply the mini. We make the change in the main thing for the next new one, but we're sort of retrofitting the old sites. So you'll want to come up with schemes, sort of toward and I'm not saying that we're at the 500 level, but you'll want to come up with some of the schemes at a higher level of automation to allow yourself to manage those lifecycle implications.
Yeah, and that's actually a limitation of Orchestry at the moment too. So it's one of the things we have to think through.
I think we need to add another column to M's thing: is idempotent or not, and then just so we can constantly show each other.
Just so we can keep using the word.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so tough to work in everyday conversations.
So in addition to riffing on the word idempotent, let's talk a little bit as we get to the top of the hour about takeaways and resources that we want to underscore for folks. Are there any here that we want to specifically highlight for folks based on what we talked about today?
I popped them all in the chat in context. One that we didn't talk about is the first one. We didn't spend any time really talking about the SharePoint Online page templates because we were focusing a lot on templating across site collections. You can make page templates just within one site collection. So if that's important to you to get consistency in one site, that might be a way to go.
I think also as a group,
I would also call out the P&P provisioning templates. If you're starting down this journey, understanding that chart that we shared with the different pieces of it, and then taking a very serious look at P&P provisioning and what it involves before you start thinking about doing it. Sorry, Mark.
That's okay. I think that our natural bent as a group is to come at this sort of from a SharePoint centric view. A lot of the other services on top of the platform are slowly or effectively or ineffectively coming up with their own kinds of templating options. So again, you're going to want to figure out, well, what is our surface area for all of these, and how can we combine this stuff together? I mean, the original promise behind site designs was that it was actually going to reach out into other services and do things. Haven't seen that yet. P&P provisioning does some work with Teams, I believe, but not a lot of the other services. So again, understanding the surface area of what a template needs to accomplish for you is a very important thing to understand before you start that technical development.
All right, so we're at the top of the hour. 2 weeks from now, I think I would expect that's going to be Todd leading us in the What's New in PowerShell conversation, probably generously sprinkled with Schoolhouse Rock references. There you go, Todd. There's your challenge.
I'll do what I can. I also have the Schoolhouse Rock DVDs, so I'll
there's your challenge right there.
We'll spin up a good soundtrack.
Any parting words from anyone else?
Mike will have his act together in 2 weeks.
That is.
I admire your optimism toward the future,
Yeah.
Julie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thanks for your input as always, and we'll plan to talk in 2 weeks about PowerShell.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.